Sarah Monroe had only been at Ridgeway High for 3 days when the trouble began. Just 16, she carried herself with a kind of deliberate stillness that made her easy to overlook, which was exactly how she liked it. She had changed schools so many times, she'd stopped learning classmates' names. Life had taught her that silence was safer than attention. But Ridgeway wasn't just another school. It was a minefield wrapped in concrete hallways and cafeteria gossip. And in those hallways, the quiet girl with tired eyes and a worn-out backpack caught the attention of the one student no one wanted to notice them. Zach Walker. To most, Zach was just a senior quarterback with a smug grin. To Sarah, he would become the fuse that lit a fire she'd tried desperately to keep buried. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Her mother, Angela, had warned her about kids like him. "Keep your head down, baby," she'd said the night before Sarah's first day. "We don't need more trouble. Not here, not again." It wasn't just advice, it was survival. They had moved across 3 states in 2 years, each time chasing peace that never lasted. Sarah knew what was at stake: a clean record, a diploma, a chance at college, and maybe one day, stability. She was tired of starting over. She just wanted to finish high school quietly and help her mom pay rent on their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. But trouble didn't care about her plans. It found her anyway. It was Thursday. The air outside was thick with fall. The scent of wet leaves and diesel from idling school buses hung heavy in the breeze. Inside, Ridgeway High throbbed with the chaos of 5th period letting out. Sarah walked alone, head low, arms tight around her books. That's when she made the mistake of taking the shortcut behind the gym, a dim corridor where students smoked, skipped class, and sometimes worse. He was waiting. Zach Walker stood with his back to the lockers, flanked by 2 boys from the wrestling team. They were laughing about something, tossing a Gatorade bottle back and forth. Sarah's sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as she passed, and that was all it took. One glance, one flicker of eye contact. "Hey, new girl," Zach called out, his voice soaked in mockery. "Where you headed? You lost?" She didn't respond, just kept walking, heart pounding. Wrong move. In 3 long strides, he caught up to her, spun her around, and slammed a palm against the locker beside her head. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I asked you a question." Her breath hitched. From behind him, the other boys snickered. One of them pulled out a phone. "She's shaking," someone whispered. "You're scaring her, man." Zach smirked. "She looks like she's about to cry." Sarah didn't cry. She never cried, not in public. But her hands were trembling, clenched tight at her sides. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind again. "Don't make a scene. We can't afford it." But inside her something stirred, not fear, not panic, something older, sharper, a memory, a voice, a stance. "You don't strike first," her old Sifu had once said. "But if they leave you no choice, you finish it fast." Zach leaned closer, breath hot with arrogance. "You think you can just ignore me?" he hissed. "Do you even know who my dad is?" He didn't see the change in her eyes. Most people wouldn't have. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm was forming. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. Zach thought she was a lamb. But Sarah Monroe, standing 5'3" with a frame as slight as a sparrow, was something else entirely. She was a black belt in disguise. And in that moment, with her back to the locker and a camera pointed at her face, she knew. This wouldn't end quietly. The crowd grew. Students passed by, phones raised, some giggling, others frozen. No one stepped in, because they thought they knew how this would end. They were wrong. And in just a few hours, they'd all know it. The corridor behind the gym was the kind of place most students learned to avoid by the end of their first week. It wasn't officially off limits, no yellow tape, no locked doors, but it might as well have been. The overhead lights flickered like they were on life support, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air, mixed with gym socks and adolescent sweat. Old banners from long-forgotten sports seasons peeled from the cinder block walls. It was the kind of place where trouble could bloom unnoticed, especially after the last bell rang. And that's exactly where Sarah Monroe found herself. Oh, alone, cornered, and surrounded. It started innocently enough. She had stayed after school for a makeup quiz in English and was cutting through the rear hallway to reach the student lot quicker. Her bus had already left, and her mother's second shift meant no ride. Her plan was to walk the 1.5 miles home before the sky turned fully dark. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. A hand clapped her shoulder, not playfully, but with weight and intention. "Hey," came the voice. That voice. Zach Walker. Sarah turned slowly. She didn't flinch, not outwardly, but her pulse spiked like it was chasing something. Her body instinctively shifted, feet adjusting to an unconscious defensive stance, just like she'd been trained to do years ago. She caught herself and softened her posture. Not here, not now. Zach stood with that smug expression he wore like a second skin, flanked by 2 of his football buddies, Mike, the stocky one who always smelled like Axe body spray, and Devin, tall and quiet, with fists like bricks. Their faces told the whole story. This wasn't a friendly encounter. "You in a rush?" Zach asked, voice low, sarcastic. Didn't get a chance to say hi to the new girl. He was already too close. Sarah remained silent. She didn't trust herself to speak. Her mind raced, running scenarios, calculating exits, weighing risk. The hallway behind her was empty. The side doors were locked. She was boxed in. "I heard you like to play tough," Zach continued, tilting his head. "That true?" Still nothing. His smirk deepened. "Maybe you think you're too good to talk to the rest of us. That it?" He took a step forward. She stepped back, not in fear, but to create space. She kept her eyes down, even though everything inside her wanted to look him square in the face and tell him to back off. But she'd done that once before, at her last school. That incident had ended with a split lip, a broken desk, and 2 weeks of suspension. The other boy had walked away clean. His parents had connections. Hers had medical bills and overdue rent. "You deaf or just dumb?" Mike added, snickering. Sarah glanced up then, just a flicker, and that was all it took for Zach to press his arm across the locker beside her, effectively pinning her in. Her back met cold metal, and the impact jolted something inside her chest. It wasn't pain, it was pressure. Years of being underestimated, ignored, dismissed. Years of trying to stay quiet just to survive. Zach leaned in close, his voice nearly a whisper. "You've been here 3 days. You're already getting on my nerves." That was when the real performance began. Mike pulled out his phone. "Gonna live stream this one," he muttered, already tapping the screen. New girls about to learn how things work at Ridgeway. Sarah's jaw clenched. She had trained for years to control her body, but no one had taught her how to control humiliation. Zach's hand moved toward her arm, not to hit, not yet, but to intimidate. He didn't need to strike to make a point. Power wasn't always in the punch. Sometimes it was in the pause before it. "What's in the bag?" he asked, eyeing her worn canvas backpack. "Something special? Secrets?" She pulled it closer, instinctively shielding it with her body. Inside was her phone, a few notebooks, and, in the front pocket, a small photo of her and her mother from years ago, smiling on the front steps of a rundown apartment in Cleveland. The photo was cracked and curled from too much handling, but it was the only thing she never left home without. "Chill," Devin said, though his voice was uncertain now. He glanced over his shoulder. "What if someone comes?" "No one's coming," Zach said flatly. "The staff clocks out early on Thursdays. Miss Sanders is probably halfway to her Buick by now." He turned back to Sarah. "And besides, we're just talking, right?" Sarah looked at him then. Really looked. His blue eyes were cold, confident, entitled. The kind of eyes that had never been told no and had never believed they could be wrong. She had met boys like this before. She had broken the wrist of one back in Pittsburgh. She had elbowed another off a bike in Charlotte. Each time, she had been labeled aggressive. Each time, her mother had to meet with administrators and explain that Sarah wasn't a delinquent. She was a girl trying to stay alive in a world that kept pushing her. But this time, she didn't want a fight. She wanted an out. Her fingers curled at her sides. Just one well-placed strike to the knee and she could be past him. One twist of the wrist and she could disarm him, drop him to the floor. But then the phone would capture it. The narrative would be written before she could explain herself. Crazy new girl attacks star athlete. The black girl with issues. She couldn't afford that. Not again. "I said, 'What's in the bag?'" Zach repeated, voice sharper now. She didn't answer. He reached toward it. A mistake. Her hand moved fast. Not a punch, but a block, a deflection. The kind you learn after 4 years of traditional forms, not meant to hurt, just to warn. His hand jerked back in surprise. "Ooh," Mike laughed. "She's got moves." Zach's expression changed, just slightly. But Sarah caught it, that flicker of realization that maybe she wasn't as helpless as she looked, that maybe he should rethink his next move. But he didn't. He grabbed her wrist. That's when she dropped her shoulder, pivoted, and twisted free in a single fluid motion, a classic release technique. Harmless, efficient. And suddenly, she was out from under him, standing 5 feet away, breathing hard. Everyone froze. Zach's eyes narrowed. "You think you're tough?" he spat. "You're going to regret that." Sarah didn't speak. She didn't move. Footsteps echoed in the distance. For 1 second, everyone just stood still, caught in a moment thick with tension and unspoken consequences. Then someone appeared at the end of the hallway. It was Miss Sanders. She wore her usual sweater vest and tired eyes, carrying a stack of manila folders. Her gaze landed on the group. She stopped, froze. For a long, long second, she did nothing. Her jaw tightened. Then she turned and walked away, quickly. Sarah's heart dropped. She had seen her, she had known, and she had left. No help was coming. Zach grinned. "Told you." The moment passed, but Sarah felt something inside her shift. A quiet, terrifying certainty. No one would save her. Not the staff, not the system, not the principal or the handbook or the school's hollow promise to protect its students. She had been hoping to avoid conflict, but conflict had found her. And next time might not end with restraint. As the boys retreated, laughing and swearing revenge, Sarah remained rooted to the floor. Her chest rose and fell in quiet tremors. She felt the bruises blooming beneath her calm. Not physical ones, not yet, but emotional bruises. The kind that shaped the rest of your life. She walked home in silence, steps slow, shoulders tight. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. Just one message. "Old Jim. Tomorrow. After last bell." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, she typed her reply. "Fine." The apartment Sarah Monroe returned to that evening wasn't much to look at. The linoleum kitchen tiles were cracked. The baseboard heaters moaned when they kicked on, and the windows rattled every time a semi passed by on Route 47. But it was home for now. Just her and her mother, Angela, surviving on night shifts, hand-me-down furniture, and a rotating shelf of dollar store candles to mask the musty air. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, backpack sliding from her shoulder with a soft thud. Her palms were sweaty, her neck tense. Her jaw ached from clenching it for too long. Zach had crossed a line, and the teacher had seen it, and walked away. For the third time in 4 years, Sarah was reminded that the system wasn't built to protect girls like her. Not the quiet ones, not the black ones, not the ones who didn't raise their voices, didn't scream, didn't cry until it was safe. If she had fought back in that hallway, there'd be no gray area. It wouldn't have mattered who grabbed who first, or that 3 boys had cornered her with bad intentions. She'd be the one in the office. She'd be the one whose record followed her to the next school. And then the next. She made it to her bedroom, flipped the light switch, and sat heavily on the twin mattress pressed against the wall. No headboard, no bed frame. Just a box spring and a blanket, and her mother's whispered promise each month. "We're going to get out of here, baby. Just hold on a little longer." She did what she always did when she needed quiet. Reached for the wooden trunk tucked under her bed. The hinges creaked softly as it opened. Inside were the fragments of a different life. Before the relocations, before the caution, before she'd learned to shrink herself down just to fit in. A white cotton G lay neatly folded on one side, yellowed now at the cuffs. Resting atop it, wrapped in soft flannel, was the belt. Black, crisp, untouched since Boston. She hesitated, fingers hovering. Then slowly, almost reverently, she lifted it out and laid it across her lap. There was a time, not long ago, really, when this belt meant everything. A symbol of control, of strength, of grace under pressure. She had earned it after 6 years of hard training, weekend tournaments, bruised ribs, broken fingers, and a level of discipline most adults struggled to achieve. Her Sifu back then, Master Lin, used to say, "The black belt doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you responsible." She had tried to live by that, until the day it all went sideways. Sarah closed her eyes. The memory surfaced like a wave she'd been trying to keep under since the moment they'd left Boston behind. It was just after Christmas break last year. A boy named Ryan had followed her home from school, saying things he shouldn't have said. She'd ignored him for weeks, kept changing her route, kept brushing off the comments. But that day, it had rained. She'd been cold, soaked, tired, and still carrying a science fair project on a trifold board that had wilted in the wind. Ryan had grabbed her wrist in the alley behind the corner store. "What's the rush, sweetheart? Thought we could hang out." She didn't even think. Her body moved faster than her mind. A shoulder pivot, a wrist lock, a takedown. She'd stopped before causing damage, but not before his chin hit the pavement hard enough to draw blood. A neighbor had seen it, called the police. By the time her mother arrived, Sarah was already in a squad car. Ryan? He was driven home by his uncle, the assistant principal. The fallout was swift. She was suspended for 10 days. The letter that followed included the words, "aggressive tendencies," and "physical threat." They never asked for her side of the story. No one wanted to hear that she was defending herself. Not when the boy came from the right family. That incident had cost her the spot she'd earned on the regional tournament team. It had cost her peace. It nearly cost her her scholarship chances. And worst of all, it had stolen her joy. She hadn't worn the G since, hadn't stepped foot in a dojo, hadn't touched the belt until tonight. She traced the embroidered characters stitched near the edge of the fabric. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from something heavier, the weight of everything she had lost trying to stay invisible. The text from earlier that day blinked back at her from the phone screen on her nightstand. Old Jim. Tomorrow. After last bell. She hadn't told her mother, not yet. Angela didn't need more stress. She was working a double shift at the hospital, managing intake paperwork and answering phones for $15.25 an hour. Sarah turned the belt over in her hands. She thought about what Zach might be planning. A fight, most likely. Or worse, an ambush meant to film her, provoke her, and upload it online for all to see. The quiet girl with the quick hands. The angry black girl with something to prove. It was never a fair fight, not when perception weighed more than truth. She set the belt aside and picked up her phone again. Scrolled through old photos. One in particular caught her eye, a picture from the state tournament 2 years ago. She stood center frame, eyes locked on her opponent across the mat. Her stance was low, powerful, her back straight, fists coiled at her sides, the kind of photo a girl kept when she needed to remember who she really was. That girl didn't look afraid. That girl knew what she was capable of. Sarah exhaled slowly. She was that girl. Still. It was after midnight when she finally lay down. Sleep came in patches. Her dreams were filled with locker doors slamming, phones flashing, voices whispering things she couldn't quite hear. Her alarm buzzed at 6:30 sharp. She blinked into the morning gloom, rubbed her eyes, and sat up slowly. Her jaw was tight. Her chest was heavy. But she wasn't broken. She folded the black belt and tucked it inside her backpack, wrapped once again in the soft flannel. Not to use it, not yet, but to carry it, to remember. Some people carried Lucky Charms. Others wore crosses or St. Christopher medals. For Sarah, it was this belt. Earned, then buried, and now, maybe, brought back into the light. She moved through the apartment quietly. Her mother had left a note on the table. "Love you. Be safe. There's soup in the fridge." A heart drawn at the end in thick blue ink. She smiled, if only a little. She dressed simply. Jeans, a black hoodie, sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed fighter. She didn't need to broadcast it. The people who mattered already knew. Outside, the air was sharp. The fall wind nipped at her cheeks. The trees lining the sidewalk were shedding their last brittle leaves, scattering gold and amber across the concrete. She walked the 1.5 miles to school with her hands in her pockets and her heart in her throat. By the time she reached Ridgeway, the parking lot was already full. Students milled about in clusters, tossing footballs, sipping coffee, gossiping about whatever social media scandal had taken root overnight. Sarah walked past them all. At her locker, she felt the stares. "She's the one," someone whispered. "That's her, the new girl. She didn't even fight back yesterday. Maybe she's not as tough as they say." She tuned it all out, because she knew something they didn't. She wasn't going to fight to prove anything to them. She was going to stand her ground because no one else would do it for her. And if Zach wanted to test what lay beneath her silence, he was about to find out that some pasts don't stay buried forever. Some of them rise when they're needed most. The next morning, Ridgeway High felt like a different battlefield. The sun had risen, yes, but it hadn't brought clarity, only weight. The sky outside was slate gray, the wind sharp enough to sting. Sarah Monroe walked through the front entrance with her hood up and shoulders squared, her black belt wrapped tightly in a flannel cloth, tucked deep in the bottom of her backpack. She could feel it there, not pressing against her back but pulsing like a heartbeat. Not a weapon, a memory, a responsibility. The hallway buzzed with morning energy, students shouting across lockers, the smell of cheap cologne and cafeteria waffles wafting in the air, but beneath it all there was a charge, an unspoken electricity. Eyes followed her. Whispered voices trailed behind her. She kept her gaze low, her breath measured. At first, the murmurs were vague. She's the one Zach cornered. "Did you see the clip? Someone got part of it on Snap. She didn't even fight back. Maybe she's scared." That last one cut. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't entirely right. Sarah wasn't afraid of Zach Walker. She was afraid of what would happen if she stopped holding back. As she rounded the corner toward her locker, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She fished it out without thinking, glancing quickly to make sure no teacher was nearby. Unknown number. The message was short. "I know you can fight. Show me what you got." She stopped in her tracks. The hallway around her continued in a blur. Students pushing past, laughter echoing off the tiles, lockers slamming like gunshots, but her world shrank down to that single, glowing line of text. Her pulse surged. The fingers gripping the phone went cold. Was it Zach, one of his goons, someone from her past? She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the reply field. She started to type, then stopped. There was no use answering. Whoever it was, they weren't asking. They were daring. They wanted her to react, to lash out, to do something that could be captured, recorded, twisted into a story where she was the aggressor again. Not this time. She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked away, her heartbeat echoing in her ears like drumbeats of war. By lunchtime, the whispers had grown into noise. She sat alone at the end of the far table in the cafeteria, pushing a slice of pizza around her tray. The cheese had gone cold. The soda was flat. She barely touched either. Across the room, Zach held court like a king surrounded by jesters. His table was full. Football players, cheerleaders, hanger-ons who didn't care who got hurt as long as they stayed close to the spotlight. He tossed French fries at Mike's face. They were laughing. Always laughing. That was the hardest part. The laughter. Not because it was cruel, but because it was casual. Like none of it mattered. Like cornering someone, threatening them, pitting them against a locker was just fun. Entertainment. Sarah kept her eyes on her tray. Then something light and damp hit her plate with a soft splat. A crumpled napkin, balled up, launched from across the cafeteria like a spitball. She looked up, slowly. Zach was staring right at her. His mouth curled into that same infuriating grin. He raised an eyebrow, wiggled his fingers in a mock wave. Sarah turned back to her food, her fists tightening under the table. Her jaw clenched until it ached. Don't give him what he wants. Don't react. Don't rise. She repeated it like a mantra. She counted to 10, then 20. Then she got up and walked out of the cafeteria without saying a word. She made it to history class with seconds to spare. Her seat was by the window, second row from the back, a view of the parking lot. Clouds churned in the sky like waves threatening to break. The teacher, a soft-spoken man in his 60s named Mr. Ellison, was already scribbling notes on the board about the American Revolution. Sarah tried to focus, tried to copy the lesson, but her hand wouldn't stop trembling. Then her phone buzzed again. She never checked it during class, but something in her gut told her to. She slid it out under the desk and tilted the screen just enough to read. Another message. "Meet me in the old gym after school. Let's see what you're hiding." Her stomach flipped. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was an ambush. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Her mind spun. Should she tell someone, report it? But to who? Miss Sanders had walked away. Principal Clarkson was known more for public image than actual leadership. Even if she spoke up, what proof did she have? A couple of text messages from an unknown number? She knew how that conversation would go. Are you sure he meant to threaten you? Maybe don't go to the gym then. We'll keep an eye on it. But nothing would happen until it was too late. It never did. The final bell rang like a starter pistol. Students flooded the halls, some laughing, some cursing the pile of homework waiting for them at home. Sarah tried to move through the crowd unseen, but she felt the eyes again. Whispers, snickers. A few turned their phones toward her, pretending to text but clearly recording. She ducked into the side hallway that led to the library. Quiet. Empty. Cool. Then a voice behind her. Hey. She froze. Turned slowly. It was Lauren. Short, lavender-streaked hair, chipped black nail polish, and the kind of cautious empathy that didn't come from trend following, but from lived experience. I've been looking for you, Lauren said gently. Sarah didn't speak at first, just nodded. You okay? Lauren asked. A pause. Sarah's voice came out quieter than she intended. Not really. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice. I saw what happened yesterday. I was around the corner. I heard everything. I didn't know what to do. Sarah nodded again. She wasn't mad. She understood better than anyone how fear could paralyze. Lauren continued. Zach's done this to a lot of people. He likes finding the ones no one will stand up for. Makes him feel powerful. Sarah swallowed. Yeah, I figured. Lauren looked around, then leaned in. He's dangerous. If he challenged you to meet him, don't go. I have to, Sarah said, surprised at the certainty in her own voice. Lauren blinked. Why? Because if I run now, I'll be running the rest of the year. But if you fight him, I'm not looking for a fight, Sarah cut in. I'm looking to stop one. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lauren spoke again, softer. If anything happens, can I be your backup? Like, if things get out of control, I'll run for help. Sarah hesitated. That kind of offer came with risk. But there was something honest in Lauren's eyes, not pity, not fascination, just quiet courage. She nodded once. Lauren reached out and touched her shoulder gently. You're not alone. Not anymore. For the first time all day, Sarah felt something settle inside her. Not peace, not yet, but maybe hope. That night, in the quiet hum of her bedroom, Sarah replayed everything. The stairs, the messages, Lauren's words. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew this much. Zach Walker wanted to see what she was hiding. He was about to find out. Not the fists, not the kicks, but the resolve, the restraint, the strength it took to stay calm when every part of her wanted to explode. She pulled the black belt from the bottom of her backpack and laid it gently on her pillow. No longer buried, no longer forgotten. The past wasn't just with her. It was guiding her. And come tomorrow afternoon, she'd meet Zach exactly where he wanted. Only it wouldn't be on his terms. It was only 7:12 in the morning, but Sarah Monroe felt like the day had already chewed her up and spit her out. She stood in front of the school bathroom mirror, hands gripping the edges of the sink. The fluorescent lighting above flickered slightly, casting a grayish hue over her reflection. Dark circles cupped her eyes, remnants of another night spent lying awake and staring at the ceiling, mind racing with every possible outcome of what would happen after that final bell. The message was still there on her phone. She'd read it again around 2 a.m., as if hoping the words would vanish or change. Old Jim, tomorrow, after last bell. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't a bluff. It was a challenge, plain and simple. And whether it came from Zach himself or someone pretending to speak for him didn't really matter. The outcome would be the same. A confrontation, maybe a beating, maybe worse. For a brief moment, she thought of deleting the message, pretending it never happened, telling herself that backing down wasn't cowardice, it was survival. That's what her mother would want, what every adult in her life would probably advise. Let the school handle it. Don't engage. Just walk away. But deep down, Sarah knew those were false comforts. The adults didn't understand, not really. At Ridgeway High, walking away didn't end things. It just made you a target all over again. The truth settled heavy in her chest. If she didn't stand up now, she'd never stop running. She made it to homeroom just as the bell rang. The usual buzz of voices died down as she entered. People stared again, not everyone, but enough. The word had gotten out. It always did. Zach was at his usual spot by the windows, legs stretched out, arms crossed over his Letterman jacket. His eyes met hers, just for a moment. He gave her the kind of smile that made your skin crawl, more smug than amused, more entitled than human. Sarah sat down without looking back. By third period, the whole school seemed to know something was going to happen. The whispers swirled through the hallways like autumn leaves in a storm. Gym after school. She's gonna get wrecked. No way she shows. I heard she used to fight guys back in Boston. Whatever, Zach's gonna flatten her. Sarah tuned it out mostly. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep could cure, but the kind that built up after years of pretending you didn't notice the way the world pressed down on you. During lunch, she found herself at the table near the cafeteria windows again, alone until Lauren showed up, tray in hand, brows furrowed. "You okay?" Lauren asked, her voice low. Sarah shrugged, poking at her apple slices. "As okay as I can be." Lauren slid into the seat across from her. "Did you get another message?" Sarah shook her head. "Number. But I don't need one. We both know it's happening." Lauren's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't have to go." "I do," Sarah said quietly. "You don't," Lauren countered, her hands tightening around her plastic fork. "Look, I've seen what Zach does. He doesn't stop. He escalates every time. And if you fight back, they'll blame you, especially if you win." Sarah looked up, locking eyes with her. "I'm not going there to fight. I'm going to end it." Lauren paused, reading the tension in Sarah's shoulders, the fire flickering behind her calm. What does that mean? It means, if I let this slide, I'll spend the rest of my senior year looking over my shoulder, and I'm done with that. The air between them hung heavy. Lauren nodded slowly, her voice quiet. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to drag Lauren into the mess, but she also knew she might need someone, anyone, if things spiraled. "If you hear anything loud, if it sounds bad, run and get help. That's it, don't stay." Lauren nodded again. "I can do that." There was a long pause before Lauren reached across the table and gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're not alone," she whispered. It was a simple gesture, but it broke something loose inside Sarah. Not fear, not sadness. Something more vulnerable, the need to believe that someone actually gave a damn. The rest of the school day passed in a strange haze. Sarah went through the motions, reading pages she didn't absorb, answering questions she didn't really hear. Every tick of the clock brought her closer to the inevitable. By the time the final bell rang, her legs felt like lead. The hallways erupted in their usual post-class chaos. Students flooded the lockers, spilled into stairwells, darted toward buses and rides. But a second current rippled just beneath that routine noise, a darker, pulsing energy. They knew they were watching. Some weren't even trying to hide it, already heading toward the back of the building. Phones ready, eyes hungry. Sarah took a deep breath. She walked slowly, deliberately, past the exit doors, through the West Wing corridor, down the side hall that led toward the old gym. Her sneakers echoed faintly on the linoleum. The old gym was barely used anymore. Mostly storage, old sports equipment, broken mats, and forgotten uniforms. But it still had power, still had space, still had enough history in its dusty corners to make it the perfect place for a showdown. When she pushed open the door, the air hit her first, musty, stale, and cold. The lights overhead buzzed weakly. Only half of them worked, casting long, uneasy shadows across the cracked wooden floor. Zach was already there, leaning casually against a beam, arms folded, flanked by Mike and Devin. Sarah stepped in and let the door swing shut behind her. "You actually came," Zach said, voice echoing. Sarah nodded once. "Why wouldn't I?" Zach pushed off the beam and strolled toward her, a lazy predator sizing up his prey. "Most people know better." She said nothing. He circled her slowly. The others stayed still, but their postures were tense, waiting. Zach leaned in. "You think you're some kind of warrior? You think you're going to make me look bad?" Sarah's voice was calm. "I think you've already done that yourself." Mike chuckled behind him. Devin didn't laugh. He looked nervous. Zach's grin flickered just for a second. "Big talk," he muttered. "Let's see if you can back it up." He raised his fists. Not like a trained fighter, but like someone who'd watched too many action movies. Wide stance, loose elbows, all show. Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not here to fight," she said. Zach sneered. "Too late for that." And then he lunged. It was clumsy, impulsive. Sarah moved like a tide, fluid, deliberate. She sidestepped, pivoted, and let him pass harmlessly by. He stumbled, caught his balance, spun, he swung again. This time she blocked, hard, fast, precise, just enough to deflect, just enough to warn. But Zach didn't stop. He rushed her with a grunt of frustration, fists flailing. She ducked, twisted, and planted him on his back with a clean sweep. Not a punch, not a kick, just technique. He hit the floor with a heavy thud. Mike stepped forward instinctively, but Devin grabbed his arm. "Don't," he muttered. Zach groaned, winded, but not hurt. Sarah stepped back, gave him space, raised her hands, not in defense but in closure. "You asked," she said, voice steady. "Now you know." Zach pushed himself up slowly, eyes wild, lips curled in fury. "You're dead," he hissed. Sarah shook her head. "Number, I'm just done." At that moment, the gym door creaked open. Lauren stood there, half hidden, eyes wide. She mouthed something. "Be careful." Behind her, footsteps, multiple pairs, heavy ones. Zach froze. Miss Sanders entered first, her usual calm replaced with urgent purpose. Then Principal Clarkson. Then 2 campus security officers. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe Lauren, maybe a student with more conscience than crowd thirst. The room shifted. Zach's bluster crumbled. Sarah lowered her hands and stepped back. The moment had passed, but the message remained. She hadn't come to fight. She'd come to finish something Zach had started, and finish it she had. The gym fell still, like the moment before a storm breaks. Sarah Monroe stood in the middle of the cracked, dimly lit floor, back straight, eyes locked on Zach Walker. Dust motes spun in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the narrow windows near the ceiling. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Behind Zach, his 2 flanking goons hovered in indecision. Mike, the broader of the 2, clenched and unclenched his fists like he was psyching himself up for something. Devin, thinner and quieter, looked increasingly uneasy. His foot tapped the floor in a rhythm that suggested he wanted nothing more than to bolt. Zach hadn't spoken since Sarah put him on the floor moments earlier, with a move so fluid it could have been choreographed. But this wasn't theater. This wasn't practice. This wasn't a mat where rules and referees defined the limits. This was real. And real things broke when pushed too far. "Who the hell are you, anyway?" Zach finally snapped, rising to his feet and wiping the dust from his jacket sleeve. Sarah didn't answer right away. Her heart was still hammering in her chest. Her limbs buzzed with adrenaline. But her breathing stayed even, just like she'd practiced for years. "Someone who's tired of being cornered," she replied quietly. Zach's lips twisted into a sneer. "That's so." He spat on the floor, more show than spite, and lunged again. This time his attack was harder, faster, more reckless. It wasn't about intimidation now, it was about ego, anger, rage. Sarah didn't step back. She ducked, twisted, and let his momentum carry him past her. She countered with a palm strike to his shoulder, controlled, calculated, just enough to unbalance him. He stumbled again. Behind him, Mike swore under his breath. Devin shifted uneasily. Sarah stepped back, raising her hands. "You can stop this." Zach's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. His face flushed crimson. "You trying to humiliate me in front of everyone?" he barked. "You think you're going to walk out of here looking like the winner?" "I'm not here to win," Sarah said, her voice low. "I'm here to stop you." For a flicker of a second, Zach hesitated. Then he roared and came at her one more time. His fist grazed her chin, just enough to make her jaw sting, but not enough to shake her. That was his mistake. She didn't hesitate. She retaliated with a clean block, then stepped in and delivered a palm strike to his chest, forcing him backward with a grunt. Not to hurt, just to stop, to make him understand. She wasn't a victim, not today, not ever again. Mike cursed. "Man, she's for real." Devin looked toward the door. "I'm not doing this." Mike grabbed his sleeve. "Don't be stupid." But Devin had already stepped back. "I didn't sign up to jump a girl who's not even fighting dirty." Sarah didn't look at them. Her eyes remained on Zach, who now stood still, panting, glaring, calculating his next move. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Fast, deliberate, dozens of them, echoing off the gym's concrete walls. The door slammed open. Miss Sanders was the first one through, her cardigan flapping like a flag in the wind. Behind her came Principal Clarkson, broad-shouldered, no-nonsense, with a sharp crease in his khakis that said he didn't tolerate disruption. 2 campus security officers followed, their radios squawking softly. And just behind them, half-shadowed by the hallway light, was Lauren, phone in hand, eyes wide, scanning the scene with a heart-wrung mix of panic and hope. Zach froze mid-motion. Sarah lowered her arms instantly. The officers moved fast, splitting the room with presence alone. Clarkson's voice boomed through the gym like thunder. "What is going on here?" Zach opened his mouth to answer, but Miss Sanders cut him off with surprising force. "Save it, Mr. Walker." The officers flanked the group, herding the boys to one side. Clarkson turned to Sarah. "You, over there." Sarah didn't resist. She stepped to the opposite end of the gym, hands open, palms out. Not in surrender, but in signal. "I'm not hiding anything." One of the officers looked at her closely, then to Zach, then back. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. No bruises, nothing broken. But her voice cracked at the edges. The tension in her jaw betrayed more than she let show. Not pain, resignation, exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from exertion, but from years of carrying what you can't share. Clarkson turned to his assistant principal, who had just arrived, huffing and flustered, "We got an anonymous tip something was going down here," Clarkson said grimly. Clearly, it was credible. Miss Sanders folded her arms. "This has been brewing for days." Clarkson glanced toward the boys. "Let's get them to the office. Now." One of the officers nodded. "Let's move." Zach tried to shrug it off with a cocky grin, but it didn't land. His hair was mussed, his shirt untucked, his pride clearly wounded. Mike and Devin looked even more uncertain now, the swagger gone from their posture. As they were led out, Clarkson turned to Sarah. "You too?" She nodded again, swallowing hard. Her eyes caught Lauren's as she walked past. Lauren gave a small shaky nod, some mixture of "you did it" and "it's not over yet." Sarah passed through the gym doors into the hallway, her body humming with delayed tension. The fight was over, but the fallout was just beginning. They separated her from the boys immediately. Standard protocol, probably. She found herself sitting alone in the assistant principal's office, the stiff-backed chair cold against her spine. The tick of the wall clock grated against her nerves. The silence was the worst part. Then came the waiting. She stared at the fake potted plant on the corner filing cabinet, the faded poster on the wall about integrity in adversity, and tried to keep her hands from trembling. Miss Sanders eventually entered, her expression tight. "Sarah," she said, closing the door behind her, "tell me what happened, and tell me the truth." Sarah did, every word. She told her about the texts, about the whispers, about being cornered behind the gym, about Lauren's warning, about trying not to fight, but being given no choice when Zach came at her. Miss Sanders listened without interruption. When Sarah finished, the older woman sat in silence for several seconds. Her eyes were tired, but not unkind. "I believe you," she said finally. "But the district might not." Sarah nodded, already knowing. "They always see what they want," she murmured. Miss Sanders sighed. Still, the footage might help. One of Zach's sidekicks spoke up. "Said you didn't start it, said you showed restraint." Sarah blinked. "Devin?" "Yep," the teacher confirmed. "Said Zach planned the whole thing. Wanted to provoke you, wanted to film it, humiliate you." Sarah's throat tightened. He had spoken up. Someone had finally spoken up. Miss Sanders stood. "We're calling your mother. I expect this won't be over today, but for what it's worth, you did the right thing." Sarah didn't smile, but she did exhale, slowly, deeply. Maybe, for once, that meant something. When she finally stepped out into the hallway, the school felt different. Not softer, not safer, but changed. Word had already spread. Students glanced up from lockers. Some nodded. A few offered quiet, reverent claps, not loud, not showy, just acknowledgement, as if to say, "We saw, we know." Lauren was waiting near the front doors. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped Sarah in a tight, trembling hug. "I was so scared they'd twist it all," she whispered. "Me too," Sarah whispered back. Lauren pulled away and looked at her carefully. But they didn't. Sarah didn't answer, because she wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a fighting chance. And not just in a gym surrounded by enemies, but in the system, too. Maybe, just maybe. The silence had finally cracked. By the time the school administration finally took control of the situation, the damage, though invisible to the naked eye, was already done. Sarah Monroe sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair outside Principal Clarkson's office, the kind of chair designed more to hold a body than to comfort it. Her backpack rested on the floor between her feet, black belt still inside, coiled like a sleeping snake in its flannel wrapping. She hadn't touched it since the confrontation. Didn't need to. Her memory had carried the moves, but her body carried the weight. Across the hall, Zach Walker and his entourage had been led into a different room by the school's campus officers. The door closed behind them with a dull, authoritative thud. Everything in the corridor felt exaggerated now, every sound amplified, every glance weighted. The secretary at the front desk typed with the rhythm of a hammer. Phones rang in sharp, piercing bursts. Even the ticking of the old analog wall clock sounded like it was driving nails into the floor. The hallway held more than noise. It held judgment and expectation. Students passing by slowed when they saw her, some with curiosity, others with quiet awe. A few offered her cautious nods of support, but none said anything. Lauren appeared for just a moment from around the corner. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw the relief in her face, but also the fear. Lauren's hand gave a quick thumbs up before she vanished again, probably not wanting to be dragged into the official mess. Smart girl. The school might have arrived unseen, but everyone knew that just because the authorities showed up didn't mean they'd do the right thing. Inside the principal's office, the conversation took a sharp, familiar turn. Clarkson sat at the head of the long wooden conference table, hands folded neatly. His graying hair was combed to perfection, and his navy tie bore the Ridgeway crest, a constant reminder of institutional pride. Beside him sat Miss Sanders, her arms crossed, brow furrowed, clearly worn down by the day's events. Sarah was called in alone. She sat across from them, back straight, legs crossed at the ankles, hands resting on her thighs. She was ready. At least she tried to be. "Miss Monroe," Clarkson began, his voice calm but clipped. "I want to be very clear. We are treating this incident with the seriousness it deserves." Sarah nodded once, eyes steady. "We've spoken to Zachary and his friends," he continued. "They claim you were the aggressor, that you lured them to the old gym and initiated a physical altercation." There it was, the spin, the story, the convenient lie. Sarah didn't flinch. "I have text messages," she said evenly. "They asked me to meet them there. I can show them to you." Miss Sanders held out her hand, and Sarah retrieved her phone, unlocking it and scrolling to the message. "Meet me in the old gym after school. Let's see what you're hiding." The teacher examined it. Clarkson leaned over her shoulder and squinted. He leaned back with a sigh. "The number is unlisted, no name, because bullies don't sign their threats," Sarah replied. Miss Sanders almost smiled at that, but Clarkson's expression remained unchanged. "We also have footage," Sanders added, now flipping through her own phone. A few students recorded part of it. Nothing graphic, but enough to show her being provoked. Clarkson shifted uncomfortably. Be that as it may, the district has a zero-tolerance policy regarding fighting, regardless of who starts it. Of course. Sarah felt the familiar ache rise in her throat. She swallowed it down. "I didn't throw the first punch," she said quietly. "You blocked. You retaliated," Clarkson said. "It's still considered engagement." "I defended myself. That's not what the footage shows in full." Sarah paused. "You mean you only watched what you were sent, what they decided to show?" That hit him harder than expected. He adjusted his tie. "We're still investigating," he said at last. Sarah sat back in her chair, not defeated, but resolved, because she'd been here before. Back in Boston, same office layout, different nameplate, same table, different chairs, same story. Back then, she'd tried to reason too. Back then, they'd suspended her anyway. A soft knock at the door broke the tension. One of the campus security guards peeked in. "Principal Clarkson, one of the students, Devin Barnes, asked to speak with you. He says it's important." Clarkson frowned. "Send him in." A moment later, Devin walked in. looking like he'd been dragged through a moral storm. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his hoodie. His eyes flicked toward Sarah, then dropped. "Go ahead," Clarkson said, motioning to the seat beside Sarah. Devon sat, nervous energy practically steaming from his skin. "Look, I wanted to say it wasn't her fault." Clarkson raised an eyebrow. Devon continued, voice low. "Zach planned the whole thing, said he wanted to film her. Make her lose it so she'd get expelled." Clarkson narrowed his eyes. "You're admitting that?" Devon nodded. "Yeah, and she didn't attack him. She warned him, told him to stop. I saw it all." Miss Sanders glanced at Sarah, then back at Clarkson. "Well?" Clarkson exhaled slowly. "Put it in writin'." Devon nodded, standing. "I will." He left the room, door clicking softly behind him. Silence followed. Clarkson leaned back in his chair. "Miss Monroe," he said slowly, "based on this new testimony, we'll adjust our approach. You're not off the hook completely. There are still concerns about safety and school rules, but it appears this was not an act of aggression on your part." Sarah stared at him. "You mean I'm not being suspended?" "Not at this time." She didn't thank him. She just nodded. They let her leave the office a few minutes later with a written warning in her file and the understanding that any further incidents, regardless of context, would come under serious scrutiny. Zach, however, was placed on immediate suspension, pending an investigation. His father was already on the phone with the district office, threatening to pull donations, calling it a misunderstanding, accusing Sarah of instigating. But this time, something was different. Too many eyes had seen it. Too many students had shared the videos. The internet had receipts. And now, even his own sidekick had confessed. The armor around Zach's reputation had cracked. The hallway outside the office seemed quieter as Sarah walked out. Students made room for her to pass, parting like water around a stone. No jeers, no whispers this time. Only space, only silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of realization, respect, or maybe awe. She spotted Lauren waiting near the main entrance, clutching her phone with white knuckles. As soon as Sarah stepped outside, the late afternoon sun warmed her face. Lauren rushed to meet her. "What happened?" she asked breathlessly. Sarah exhaled. "He's suspended. I got a warning." Lauren's eyes went wide. "That's it?" Sarah nodded. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. "I think so." Then, for the first time in hours, she let herself smile. Small, tired, real. They walked together down the front steps of Ridgeway High. The breeze had picked up. Autumn leaves rustled across the sidewalk. Sarah didn't say much. She didn't need to. Because now, with the hallway drama behind her, and the truth beginning to bloom, she knew the battle was never just about Zach. It was about being believed. And maybe, finally, she was. The aftermath came not with sirens but with silence. For Sarah Monroe, the days that followed the confrontation in Ridgeway High's old gym were a strange blend of relief and unease. In one sense, the threat was gone. Zach Walker had been suspended. In another, it had only just begun. Because in schools like Ridgeway, justice didn't fall like a gavel. It leaked, slow and political, shaped by whispers, privilege, and who donated what to the sports program. The morning after the confrontation, Principal Clarkson made an announcement over the intercom. His voice, ever polished and steady, crackled faintly. "Students, as a reminder, Ridgeway High maintains a zero-tolerance policy on physical altercations. A recent incident is being investigated. We ask that students refrain from spreading rumors or misinformation. Let's focus on maintaining a safe and respectful environment." That was it. No mention of names. No mention of who started what. Just vague phrasing that might have painted both parties as guilty in the eyes of anyone who hadn't seen the footage or the bruises. But the students knew, and that changed everything. By third period, Sarah noticed the shift. People she'd never spoken to were holding doors open for her. Classmates who used to ignore her nodded silently in the hallways. One even passed her a folded note. "You're the first one who ever stood up to him." Thank you. She didn't recognize the handwriting. Maybe that was the point. In the cafeteria, she was no longer alone. Lauren was at her side, as always, but now others began trickling in. A quiet girl from band. A freshman with fading bruises under one eye. A boy who always ate lunch behind the school library. One by one, they gathered, not to form a clique, but a quiet community. And still Zach's absence loomed. His table sat mostly empty now. A few loyalists remained, trying to hold on to the old order, but their energy had changed. They were quieter, defensive, unsure how to act without their leader setting the tone. Rumors flew faster than a cold front over Michigan. Zach's dad is threatening to sue. He's trying to say Sarah faked it. Someone said there's footage from another angle that clears her completely. Maybe the school board finally realized they can't keep protecting him. Sarah kept her head down, but her ears open, because she knew the real battle wasn't fists, it was narrative. And Ridgeway High was nothing if not a battlefield of stories. At home, her mother, Angela, held the school letter in both hands, lips pursed as she read the formal wording. Engaged in a physical altercation, resulting in administrative warning. No suspension at this time. Angela's eyes skimmed the page 3 times. Then she folded it slowly, laying it on the kitchen table with a sigh. "I told you to stay out of trouble." Sarah didn't speak. "You could have walked away," her mother continued. "Let the teachers handle it. Let them sort it out." Sarah finally looked up. "Mom, they weren't going to help me. You know that." Angela's face softened, but only slightly. "You don't know that." "I do. One of them literally walked away when she saw it happening." Angela stood, crossed her arms, leaned against the counter. The clock ticked behind her. After a long pause, she spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm proud of you, you know, but I'm scared too. You don't get many chances in a system like this. We've worked hard to keep your record clean. We can't afford to start over again." Sarah nodded slowly. "I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't let him keep doing what he was doing." Angela reached for her, brushed a hand through her daughter's curls. "Just promise me. If something like this happens again, you'll tell me first." "I promise." And she meant it. Because in her mother's eyes, she saw something deeper than fear. Respect. Meanwhile, the school board had begun to feel the heat. A local news blog ran a story titled, "Privilege or Protection?" Ridgeway student suspended after self-defense incident. It was vague but pointed. The article included anonymous statements from students and hinted at Zach's long history of harassment, some of it allegedly known to staff. Someone had clearly leaked the information. It spread fast. The PTA group chat was on fire. One parent wrote, "This isn't the first time I've heard about that Walker boy." Another responded, "My daughter dropped out of cheer because of him." Zach's father, Raymond Walker, longtime donor and president of the Ridgeway Athletic Boosters, was furious. He called an emergency meeting, tried to twist the narrative into one of targeted character assassination against his son. But the damage was done. The district had no choice but to initiate a formal review, and, with a handful of faculty speaking privately about past incidents and student complaints suddenly resurfacing, they were forced to issue a public statement. Ridgeway High is committed to the safety and dignity of all students. Recent disciplinary decisions have been made based on student testimony, school policy, and video evidence. The district condemns all forms of harassment and is actively reviewing its procedures. In the hallways, that translated to one simple truth. Zach wasn't coming back anytime soon, and Ridgeway was starting to breathe again. For Sarah, the attention wasn't easy. Some students treated her like a celebrity, asking her to retell the story, describing her movements like she was a superhero. Others looked at her with wariness, as if she were a bomb with a faulty timer. "She's cool," one boy whispered in the hallway, "but don't get on her bad side." "She's not violent," Lauren corrected when she overheard the remark. "She's just done being pushed around." Sarah herself avoided the spotlight. She declined interview requests. She didn't post about it on social media. But she didn't hide either. Instead, she focused on something new. She and Lauren started talking seriously about a student-led support group. Not just for bullying, but for anyone who felt unseen, unheard, unsafe. They called it Stand Strong. The name came from a line Sarah had remembered from her martial arts instructor back in Boston. "Power is not in the strike. It's in the stance you refuse to break." They drafted a mission statement, met with the school counselor, and began quietly recruiting. Within a week, 10 students had joined, each with a story, each carrying something they'd never had the space to share before. A girl from the theater program admitted to being followed home twice. A freshman boy described months of taunting about his speech impediment. A senior revealed he had transferred schools last year after a fight with another student, one that started, just like Sarah's, with provocation and ended with unfair blame. The meetings were simple. Sit in a circle, speak if you want, listen if you can't. No judgment, no grades, no attendance sheets, just truth. Zach eventually texted Sarah, a short message sent 2 weeks after his suspension was announced as indefinite pending transfer. "I'm sorry. No excuses, no explanations, just that." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing her reply. "I accept your apology, but I won't forget what you did." She hit send, and that was that. The day after winter break, the school held an assembly. This time, not for a pep rally or sports team recognition, but to launch a new initiative, Ridgeway's Safe Voices campaign. Sarah was invited to speak. She stood in front of the auditorium, hundreds of eyes on her, and took a slow breath before beginning. "I never wanted to stand out," she said. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to graduate, to help my mom, to stay quiet. But when someone corners you enough times, silence stops feeling like protection. It starts to feel like surrender." The crowd listened. Some nodded, others cried, and when she finished, they stood, all of them. A standing ovation, not for a fighter, not for a rebel, but for a young woman who chose dignity over fear. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she hadn't dared to believe weeks ago. She wasn't just surviving Ridgeway, she was changing it. Spring arrived slowly in Ridgeway, carried on the backs of soft winds and blooming dogwood trees. By the time the buds pushed through the soil and the snow finally stopped threatening to return, the name Sarah Monroe no longer belonged to the girl who used to sit silently in the back of the room. She had become something more, an anchor, a voice, a symbol. But she had not asked for it. Even in the glow of recognition, she remained steady, grounded, cautious. The price of being believed, finally, was the knowledge that it could be taken back in a heartbeat. That reputations were fragile, that some scars didn't fade, even when justice leaned in your direction. Still, Sarah walked taller now. There were no more texts from unknown numbers, no whispers as she passed by, no Zach. His transfer had been made official, quietly and without ceremony. Some said his father pulled strings to get him into a private academy. Others believed the district had pressured the family into stepping aside to avoid further controversy. Either way, his absence left a vacuum at Ridgeway High, one filled not with fear, but with something new. Possibility. Stand Strong, the student support group she co-founded with Lauren, had grown beyond expectation. What began with 10 students around a foldable table had blossomed into a formal club with rotating leadership, weekly sessions, and even faculty involvement. Posters lined the halls with hand-drawn slogans. Your voice matters. You don't have to take it. Stand strong. Stand together. A bulletin board outside the counselor's office became a public message wall. Notes appeared there daily, some scrawled in pencil, others carefully written on bright paper. Messages like, "Thank you, Sarah." I finally told someone. I stood up for a friend today. It felt good. I used to feel invisible. Now I feel seen. Sarah would stop by that board some mornings, just for a second. She'd read the notes, but never add one. Her message had already been written, with action. Her relationship with her mother deepened, too. Angela had begun attending evening PTA meetings, surprising even herself. She'd spoken, trembling, hesitant, at a parent roundtable on school safety, sharing how close their family had come to losing everything over a misunderstood fight in another city. "You think it can't happen to your kid," she said that night, "until it does." There was a stillness in the room afterward that words couldn't fill, and that stillness was powerful. Sarah's final semester passed with few incidents. She focused on schoolwork, college applications, and continued martial arts training, not in secret anymore, but in balance. A local studio had offered her a partial scholarship to begin assisting with younger students. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Hayashi, had heard her story through the grapevine. "I've seen students fight with anger," she'd told Sarah. "But you fought with control. That's rarer than talent." Sarah had smiled, small, humble, but something inside her had swelled. For once, her strength wasn't a burden. It was purpose. Then came the moment that marked it all. A younger student, barely a freshman, was being teased in the hallway by 2 older boys. Nothing extreme, just words, a few shoves, the kind of low-level cruelty that rarely got reported but always left a mark. Sarah happened to be passing by. She didn't yell, didn't strike, didn't even raise her voice. She stepped between them. "You done?" she asked the boys calmly. They stared at her. Then they walked away. The freshman looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. Sarah handed him a Stand Strong flyer and said simply, "Come by after school. We've got a seat for you." He nodded. And in that moment, the entire journey, every move, every bruise, every silence that had screamed louder than words, came full circle. The lesson was simple, but not easy. You don't have to fight to make a stand. But sometimes standing is the fight. And when you do it with grace, with strength, and with others at your side, you don't just protect yourself. You change the world around you. Sarah Monroe didn't set out to be a leader. She just refused to be a victim. And in doing so, she left behind more than a story. She left a blueprint. If Sarah's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you used to be, don't let the conversation end here. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or someone else when it wasn't easy? Hit the like button to support stories that speak truth, courage, and quiet resilience. And if you want more powerful content like this, real stories, real strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters, and your presence helps build the kind of community we all deserve. Let's stand strong together.